Yeah, no, thanks, Jared, and to everyone that helped make this week possible, Henry Stored and Orange Logic and the rest. Yeah, so I've worked in DAM for quite a number of years on both sides of the fence, with both being with DAM vendors, but also on the customer side, being responsible for an individual DAM, and just wanted to step through a number of the highlights in regards to what to think about with your integration. So this isn't really going to be a training session on how to integrate things, and I'll have to sort of apologize in advance that a lot of these are very complex topics, and we're only just going to skim the surface. But the idea is really just to give you some thinking points and to really try and help you look at the bigger picture. So let me go ahead and just start moving through just a very short deck I have here. But the first thing we're going to talk about is enterprise architecture. And you may know this by other names, sort of environment definitions or something like that. But the idea is that you really want to sort of create a big picture of your whole ecosystem. And potentially your DAM is going to be sitting at the middle of that as your primary content warehouse, at least for your images and documents and assets. And then you'll have supporting systems around it that will help provide information to that, or will need to consume that content. So really think of it like a street map, and you're going to have different buildings that represent your warehouses of content, and then your streets are going to be the transport methods, how things get moved around, and what dependencies and relationships. So it's really about defining that. We'll go into a little bit more detail in a moment on that. The next concept is that single source of truth, right? That's one of the biggest buzzwords we hear in the industry today, and just trying to help get a better understanding of exactly what they mean by that, that it's not that there's a single place to get your truth. And it doesn't always mean that your DAM is your single source of truth for everything, but potentially it will be for your digital files. Next, this is a little bit more complex thing, but talking about taxonomies and metadata schemas. And this is how you're going to support your different groups, different content sets, and even different metadata sets. So that's going to give you a lot of things to think about in how you want to build your navigation and structure your different sections of content. Then we're going to talk about security and privacy. We've had some really good speakers earlier today and this week touch on this, but a very critical topic, and you really want to think how you're going to position your DAM to help account for that. And then the last thing is going to be adapting business processes. As Jared mentioned, you know, he was speaking with someone that was using a standalone DAM, but as you integrate it into more systems, you're really going to need to evaluate a lot of the processes that revolve around your governance, maintaining data, and everything like that, so that you're not doing the same thing 10 different ways for 10 different systems, that you're really providing consistency and structure to all of that. So let's take a first quick look at in more detail at what we mean by enterprise architecture. So it really is a map of your ecosystem. So you're going to be talking about what it makes sense to put in your DAM and what it shouldn't be. I mean, there's so much content out there. I used to have a colleague with a great set of slides that showed the tsunami wave coming in, just talking about the influx of content with everyone, you know, with mobile devices, with these high resolution cameras, and, you know, people just grabbing stuff left and right and trying to throw it into the DAM. So you really want to talk about what should be in and what should not be in your DAM, and what you're going to need to support your downstream channels. And then that's your platform. So what are you going to connect this to? What's going to consume the content in your DAM, and potentially what's going to help feed it and enrich it? And then lastly, you know, a DAM itself, of course, can be a delivery platform. You can log in to your UI, search, use its taxonomy to move around. But more often than not, it's going to be a warehouse, and your integrations are going to be the delivery platforms or the portals into that content. So you want to think about how that's structured, what the dependencies are, what the directions of data exchanges are, and the whole relationship structure. That speaks to sort of interfaces. You know, a lot of these systems provide really robust API sets, and there's a lot you can do there, especially in terms of bidirectional communication. But there's always the old tried and true, let's export a CSV into a hot folder. The next system can pick it up and map it and act on it and work with that. And then sort of speaking to that whole UI thing, how are you going to manage your access? You know, you can certainly have local accounts into your DAM. Works great if you are, say, in your Marcon team and you're just going in there to grab some images or some sales presentations. But if you have a larger organization and you need to really map people to roles, or you're even working with external customers, you know, where does IAM and CIAM come into play? Where you're really going to be using identity management to determine where an end user gets routed and how they're going to be able to consume the content. So again, looking at DAM sort of as the center of the universe. Some people will make some of these bubbles bigger. They'll have different bubbles, you know, but the idea is that DAM is going to really be the center of all your digital file content, as well as a good bit of metadata, but some of that may flow out from the DAM, and of course, other things may flow in. So then that sort of gets to that single source of truth, and that really comes to that bigger topic when we say, where is this information coming from, and what directions is this information flowing? A big sort of point to think of is the types of data that you're going to be enriching your assets with, and whether that data is going to really be asset specific, right? If you have a photograph of a family at a beach, certainly you could tie in general information about the beach that's not specific to that asset. But if you're describing the activity in that, it's going to be descriptive and unique to that asset. That's probably going to be managed directly within your DAM for that specific asset. But if you're including product photography in your DAM, you're not going to want to manage the individual product data on every image or manual related to that product, but you're probably more going to reference another system that's responsible for all of your product information. And maybe for images, you bring over one subset of information, just describing maybe the product name, a product family, something like that, that makes it easy to find. But if you have a manual, then you may have a very different set of data that would pull over a different set of data. And then lastly, what is going to be sort of your approval or publishing gateway information? That can certainly exist right in the DAM. It can be part of the asset's lifecycle workflow, where it moves through different stages until it's approved and then it's released to your downstream channels. But it can also be that the information required to determine when an asset or the metadata maintained on an asset can be delivered to a channel is coming from somewhere else. So you really want to think what is going to control or drive that approval or clearance for that asset or its information to take off. So let's move on to our next topic, because I know we need to be really time conscious today. I want to talk about taxonomies and metadata schemas. And what this really is the structure that you organize your content by. And one of the big questions is whether or not you're really working with one big bucket for your entire organization, or if you're really creating almost mini DAMs within your DAM for different departments for different needs. So that you may have a Marcom area and you need to belong to a Marcom group in order to access that content. The metadata that shows up on those assets is going to be very specific to that group of assets, and then some other group that logs in, maybe your photography department that does something, can manage their own content and something else, and whether or not you move it back and forth. And as I mentioned before, depending on the role and the type of content, you want to consider what type of adaptive assignment of metadata or masks that you can put over. Very likely, depending on your role, when you log into the system, you're going to have different navigation needs because you work with the content differently, or you're going to care about very different information on the same assets, or different sets of information on a different set of assets totally. So that's another piece you really want to look at. How do you want to structure your taxonomy and your segregation of your content within your DAM? And is any of that going to be channel specific, or is it going to be more role specific? But something really important to be aware of. So let's jump next here. I'm not going to try and pretend I can speak to all of the concerns for your security and privacy, but these are some of the things that you really need to think about. And I think one important thing is to really think about public content versus internal content, and then perhaps customer specific content, or in some cases, maybe even individual or patient specific content. How is your system going to manage the access to that? So you can certainly do a lot with permissions, building a strong matrix of user groups and roles and things like that. But there certainly will be cases where you need a much more granular control over that. So for a particular patient, you might only want to make that content for available to an assigned doctor or office, or if you're dealing with information that gets transmitted to a health insurance company, how you make sure that only the specific information is done that. And you're going to need to make sure that either you can handle that within your DAM, or leveraging the metadata in your DAM, you pass that responsibility on to your delivery platform. Is that a portal that you build, that is just using the DAM to reference content and it manages that access? Or are you really going to be wanting to have people going directly into your DAM and trying to manage that? And this is also going to tie into meeting any regulatory requirements. How are you going to handle that? Will the separation of the exposure to the end users versus the storage containers be enough, or do you actually need to have some sort of certification from your vendor in order to work with the type of content or integration that you're considering? And lastly, I think this is really my biggest thing, and that is the idea of adapting your business processes as you start to repurpose and use your content in a lot of different channels. The important thing to me is to always push the idea that consistency is flexibility. It seems sort of the opposite of, you might think, oh, I want to be able to customize it for every potential scenario. But then you find when you want to make a change, you need to go rebuild every single one of those processes. So if you can come up with consistent processes, you can make one change and that will impact all of your different integrations and methodologies that you're leveraging in your ecosystem. Then that sort of talks to the idea of a system versus process. And this is what I like to think of as, you can certainly enforce a lot of requirements and you can create restrictions with how your users can manage the content within the DAM, saying you can only do this if it's set to this stage in a workflow, or you can only modify this metadata at this stage in its life, or you need to belong to this group to perform this specific task. And a lot of those type of restrictions and controls are very necessary. But a lot of things really make sense to push back on your end users and the processes that they use to work with the content in the system, including adding it to the system, right? We'd all like to say, how do we keep garbage out of the system? You're really not going to be able to build the tools to completely prevent that, right? You could put resolution or color space requirements, you know, some required metadata fields to make sure that there's appropriate information on it. But really, it's going to work much better if there is an external process that really dictates what you are supposed to do in the system, what you're not supposed to do in the system, and how you manage content. So it's good to think when you build this, where you want to leverage the system controls versus where you really want to build a smarter business process to help drive all of that. So I sort of went through that a lot more quickly than I expected, but the idea was that all of these points I could spend, you know, an hour on each, and I thought this might sort of give us a starting point to see if there were any questions that anyone wanted to sort of dive deeper into, or if not, I certainly can pick some of my favorites and really throw out some different use cases.
All right, Peter. Well, I have lots of questions too, so so we'll get to as many as we can in the time allotted here. But I did want to just remind everyone, you know, if you do have questions, feel free to, don't be shy. Feel free to add it to the list, and we'll get to as many as we can. So, Peter, earlier today, I don't know if you had a chance to see the panel discussion that we did, but one of the questions I asked the panelists was, or I challenged the panelists to kind of, let's make a list of all the integrations that we're aware of that hit a dam, right? Or possibly could hit a dam. And I just wanted to ask you kind of the same, you know, could you give us a sense of, you know, what exists at Sartorius or in other responsibilities, what systems have you seen connect into a dam, either downstream or upstream?
Right. Well, I think just like people in your panel responded, probably the primary system that comes up is your website, your CMS. So you're going to want to leverage both your images, your documents to build up the content in that website. The metadata can be critical. But at the same time, just like you talked about with your DAM 3.0, you're going to want to get some feedback from that website in terms of, you know, what happened with that content, what type of pages were on there, what type of SEO information can you then pull back and integrate to potentially increase the ranking of assets in your searches and things like that. You know, another big system is going to be related to all of your product information. So either an ERP or a PIM. You'll really want to sort of think about what type of content you have in your DAM and where you're going to pull the information to enrich that. And there's a lot of bi-directional information between like a PIM and a DAM, because usually like a PIM is that sort of marketing data layer over your ERP information. But you're going to need to support that with additional assets and then drive a lot of your publishing perhaps out of your PIM, at least for product related content. And you're going to need the support of all that metadata and the idea of trying to automate as much of that as possible. Again, it's going to be the integration of the metadata, the tags, the publishing gateway or approvals that you put together. Social media is another big one. If you're building a newsletter, how can you link to content in the DAM? And do you really want it pulling that content directly from the DAM, or do you want to have a different delivery platform? Meaning, you know, what is the SLAs on all your different systems, and where can an end user go to for support? I mean, if you are sharing your DAM out to the general public, you need to have a much more robust support structure in place than if you are somehow using your website to pass it through that. It also ties into the access control and the idea of a portal or delivery platform. Other systems, you may have tools within your systems, within your organization. I think a couple people mentioned different ones where you can have a template for building brochures and content, or you can work directly in InDesign. So a lot of the creative tools, getting things into your collaborative tools, Teams and such like that. And I think if we jump back, I had that one slide earlier that sort of showed all of those different potential systems, you know, so ERP, PIM, WCMS or websites. Yeah, but
Yeah, you hit
anything
on
you
a
can
lot of
think
them.
of that will use it.
That's right. So, and I'm just curious in your experience, given that this is such a healthcare focused audience, HIPAA compliance is so top of mind for so many people. Have you encountered any situations where not only did you have to worry about the compliance of the dam, but also how the dam talked to an adjacent system and making sure that they were HIPAA compliant? Or have you ever had to deal with that end-to-end compliance issue?
I won't say that I've dealt as strictly with that, but certainly
Yeah.
working with a number of different companies in the medical industry, the same concerns that are regulated by that are preeminent, right?
Yeah.
So you really need to evaluate the security of your transfer protocols. And that was another big reason why you want to evaluate the idea of using APIs versus dropping off flat files into hot folders. Much higher level of exposure to the data there. You also, again, really need to think about your access controls, right? If the dam is really a warehouse and it's isolated from anyone other than your content creators and managers, there's far less concern about those type of regulations. That where the issue really comes into play is when you're delivering that content to the systems where it will be consumed. So depending on the particular regulations in your industry or your country, you're going to need to figure out what the actual regulations are if it's on the specific dam warehouse or its communication channels and end delivery endpoints.
Sure. So Ariel has a good question. She says that, integrations are great, but how do we get users to adhere to the workflows we have put in place to ensure that some sort of governance is being held to? Right.
Yeah.
I mean, and I think integrations just make the processes, sometimes they improve things, but sometimes they make it just more complicated to keep people in line and doing what they're supposed to do. So do you have any advice for Ariel there?
Well, it's always a balance. The idea, again, you want to set probably some level of minimum required fields for adding content. You want to have workflows, if possible, in your system that move an asset through its life cycle, and you want to make those very clear to your end users how you do that. But the other thing you really need to do when you're setting up all of your system and processes up front is really define ownership and responsibility. And then you're going to need a way to audit that and provide feedback, right? If you have someone that is responsible for a product line and they just continually are too busy to maintain their content, and then there are complaints that it's not in the eShop or something like that, you're going to need to be able to run a report within your dam on the activity on those assets or lack of activity, so that you can use that to provide feedback and improve the overall process. So make sure that you clarify those responsibilities, but then you also provide some sort of audit or reporting tool to provide continual feedback on that, so it doesn't just end up slipping away from you.
Great. And Peter, you brought up PIM earlier, and I know PIM isn't necessarily relevant to everyone in the healthcare space, but for a certain segment, it certainly is, right? And many of you sell products, and so Michelle has a question about, which direction should information flow between a PIM and a DAM integration, right? So very often we see a PIM moving some sort of product data, and maybe not all of it, hopefully not all of it. Hopefully it's a subset into the DAM, but she's asking, do you ever see a situation where the DAM pushes assets or information back to the PIM?
Yeah, no, I've seen that in a number of different PIMs and industries, including the health industry. If you're working in a PIM, of course, you're going to want a thumbnail to represent each product. You're also going to want to be able to designate images as a primary product image versus a supporting image, because you may publish directly to your website from your DAM, but you may want to run it through your PIM so that you have all of that additional product marketing material to support it, right? You're not going to build an entire page worth of content strictly on the assets in your dam. You're going to need all of that product and family and accessories and consumables. So you're probably going to want to have an exchange both ways of information between your PIM and your DAM to feed the channels that are dependent on that marketing data. So certainly most of the systems I've set up, we do a lot of that. And you know, there's certain assets that are better suited for certain channels. So you could mark one image as primary website image, and another one as primary eShop image, and another one as web page hero shot, and another one as online catalog primary image, because it's the best thing suited for connecting your PIM or ERP into your customers for sale, you know, direct sales purchases from their own system.
I find it kind of funny that we're ending Friday afternoon on this topic of PIM and DAM integration, because this is the end of an industry week. But I imagine during the CPG day, what did we talk about? We talked about DAM and PIM integration. During even the education and museum days, you know, we talk about, you know, collections management systems and DAM integrations, and it's a very similar thing. It's bi-directional flow of data back and forth, and I think you know, there's lots to, like I said at the outset today, there's so much to learn from an industry specific perspective, but there's so much to be learned from other industries as well. And you know, I think there's so many commonalities here that it's really interesting to me. I did just want to finish off in the last few minutes here, Peter, with something that I think is a little bit more future looking, and you hinted on it, so I want to go back to it, and that's, you know, I talk about, this morning I talked about DAM 3.0, where I talk about data coming back into the DAM, you know, and I, you know, so it's not just about pushing assets out, but data based on experiences on a website, on an app, in social media, in who knows what channel. We want to pull some of that data back into the DAM, and the DAM is the logical place for it in many cases, because that's where the asset decisions are being made, right? And so let's give people who are making asset decisions the data to make those decisions right where they work, right? So I think it's such a powerful thing. But there's going to be a lot of effort into normalizing that data that comes back. And just because you can do an integration, just because you can dump your Google Analytics data back into the DAM, doesn't mean you should, right? And so, you know, have you started to think about how we can start to normalize that data? I mean, I feel like this is the frontier. This is where everyone is trying to figure this out, and I've yet to see anyone that has a great solution for it yet. But I'm just curious, you know, in your role at Sartorius, have you started to think about these things?
Yeah, no, I mean, I have the advantage. I think we're very future looking. So you get the opportunity to really look at some of the new innovations. And we even try and come up with our own on a regular basis, encouraging people to just throw out ideas and see how far we can take that in a review process. But you really want to start thinking more of use cases, because everyone is always looking for that magic button. No, dumping all of your Google Analytics back is not going to help you at all. But if you find out that you can come up with different tags or categories for an asset that is used on a web page, and you notice that among similar web pages that one is getting that many more clicks or driving that much more traffic, is it related to the asset? And can you then register that information back into the DAM, like I said, to help rank it, potentially even for, you know, channel specific things. So you'll find out whether or not a particular type of image is really helpful. Maybe you're putting up exploded images. Is that really like prompting someone's curiosity to dig deeper? And you're only going to get that feedback from the end user interaction. So you're going to also need to figure out how you would capture that. So it's, again, not just generic click information. It's really sort of creating an experience and then capturing the variables related to that to meet what needs you have in your own system.
Yeah, I think that the use case point is very well taken, and I think we're in interesting times here as we see this continue to evolve. So, Peter, thank you. This was really fantastic. I really appreciate your insight today, and on behalf of the whole Henry Stewart team, I wanted to thank you and all the speakers today, because I think we got a really good points of view from a bunch of various perspectives. So thank you so much.